If it's truth and inspiration you're seeking, welcome to Frankly Speaking with Frank Portinari. Welcome to Frankly Speaking with Frank Portinari, the podcast that gains access to real and inspiring people. So let's dig, let's delve, and let's discover, let's engage, let's explore, and let's experience the fascinating life of today's guest, David Lean. David, welcome to Frankly Speaking.
Okay.
I'm just going to make a couple of announcements. I'd like to thank all those who viewed our first couple of podcasts. It's very much appreciated. The comments that you've left, the likes and the subscriptions, it really is very much appreciated. I'd like to thank today's sponsors, Myson's Building Company, a company that's been built on good family values. I'd also like to thank Raw Media Solutions for all their technical advice and support. But the reason we're here today is to speak with David. He's very kindly agreed to come on and speak to us, and we very much appreciate that. It's a subject that people tend to show concern about, and then it goes away. It doesn't get followed through. And I'd like to think what our interview today will make people take notice and, where possible, become more involved in support groups and agencies that assist people who've gone through these experiences. So please don't, by all means come to these podcasts and look, and by all means enjoy. But it would be far better if you could basically learn something from it and help in some way. And I think that would give great support to David and many others. So, David, could I ask you first where you grew up, what part of the country you grew up in?
Yeah, I'm in a really nice place, or people see it and perceive it as a really nice place in Lytham St Anne's, which is probably 4 or 5 miles down the coast from Blackpool.
Yeah, I know it. Yeah.
I'm a Northwest guy, born and bred, born at Blackpool Vic, and a beautiful place to grow up in. Yeah.
And have you spent all your life there, or is that just where your childhood took place?
No, the first 24 years of my life, I was in Lytham St Anne's. I moved into the Blackpool area, and now I'm in the Preston area. So I'm only about 15 miles away from where I was born.
Right. Okay. And did you have siblings?
Yeah, I had a great family, really tight knit family. Great mum and dad. And then 3 brothers. So for me, couldn't have been better. 2 older brothers, 1 younger brother, and a third. And I think it was in many aspects, certainly within the family home, I was very lucky, ideal, very loved, really good environment to grow up in.
It sounds a good combination, having older brothers to pass on their knowledge to you. But equally, you can then pass on information and knowledge to a younger brother. Yeah, that must have worked quite well.
It was fantastic. 13-year spread between the 4 of us. So there's quite a big age difference between top and bottom. But it was brilliant, really, really close, and we still are. Obviously, my mum and dad sadly are no longer with us, but my brothers were still close. So
that's good. That's really good. And school, what was your school life like?
Well, if I was to start that by saying primary school, I think I was about age 9. One of my teachers at my parents' evening, sort of tongue in cheek, I suppose, but he was deadly serious, said to my parents, unfortunately, his brains are in his feet. And I was a good kid. I was really, really a good kid. I never messed about. I always did what I was told. But just an honest bloke, and at the end of the day, it didn't sink. It didn't sink where it should sink, and it certainly didn't stay where it should stay. And I think I got more A's on my report than most people did who were far cleverer than me. But the only difference were my A's were for effort, because I always tried, I always behaved, I never caused a problem, never caused an issue in class.
Yeah.
But when it came to exams and sort of just general, it just wasn't me. It was not me at all.
I suspect that most of my A's were probably for absence. and probably not authorised absence, to be honest. So where did the love of football start?
Yeah, I think like anybody that comes through the game, I don't know, I don't remember any different. You know, I've got stories, told stories of when I was 2.5, 3 years old, going to the local YMCA and getting involved in junior sort of sessions. I believe you had to be 5 at the time, and because I was, I think, quite athletic and quite natural, and I had 2 older brothers, they let me go early.
Yeah.
Well, just chasing my brothers around the garden, and you know, like in the roads in those days. I mean, you don't see many kids playing in the roads anymore, but
no.
In my day, that was it. You were in the road, and a car came about every 10 minutes. Yeah. So yeah, I've never known any different. I've always loved the game.
Did you support a particular football team?
My 2 older brothers, I think you got to remember, I'm born in '67, so you're talking now very early '70s, and right. Leeds were a very big club. And my 2 older brothers are still Leeds fanatics to this day. And I grew up, I suppose you could say, really following Leeds. But that changed when I developed my own brain. No, I think
we apologise to anybody from Yorkshire or Leeds in particular.
Well, I'm not born and bred in Yorkshire, and you know, I've got no affiliation other than my two brothers were Leeds fans, and I think it all changed really, mainly for me when I went off to Burnley Football Club when I was sort of 13, 14. Spent a couple of years with Burnley, so I went to watch a lot of home games and sort of developed a bit of a not a love for Burnley, but I suppose it took away from the love for Leeds. And then I went to Blackpool for a little while, just a few months, and then I was at Preston, and so it wasn't really till I came away from North End at sort of 19 that I really started, I suppose, supporting Liverpool.
Right.
And I've followed Liverpool ever since.
Well, I'm hoping your reference to Burnley today is an omen, because Burnley are playing Arsenal today, and I'm a Tottenham supporter. So I clearly hope Burnley win, don't I? So listen, I've used these theories before. They've never worked. These omens just do not work, unfortunately. So. What level of football did you get to? Was this semi-professional? Was this professional?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking now early to mid 80s. North End had no money, and I was very fortunate in that in a way, because all the youth team players at sort of North End at the time, well, I say almost all, broke into the reserves. In those days, there was no sort of under 21s, under 23s in those days. It was sort of youth team, reserves, first team. And the reserves and the youth team, we were really lucky. Most of the games used to play on the first team pitches. Right. So, you know, I've played on over 50 professional football grounds, many of which have now been knocked down and rebuilt and renamed. But yeah, I spent 3 seasons at North End. The first 2, the second 2, if you will, playing regularly for the reserves, played over 50 games, and played some games for Blackpool youth team, for Burnley youth team. I played for Burnley reserves as well once, and then spent a little bit of time at Fleetwood when they were non-league. So I spent a bit of time at Fleetwood before they got into the Football League, and then just knocking around West Lancs League, North West Counties leagues. But yeah, I loved it, and it was never about the money. In those days, it was never about the money. It was always about just the love of football, and I've still got that today. You know, I just love the game.
Yeah. I must admit, I grew up. It was always football mad. Absolutely, you know, you stayed out until it was dark.
Yeah.
And as you say, there was very, very little traffic in those days, and you kicked the goals were chalked up on the gable walls. You know, and your parents knew where you were. It was
Absolutely.
they knew you was out playing football. And of course, as well, the other thing was there wasn't as much football on the television.
There was
So
nothing on the
it's not like
television.
now. I mean, God, there's not a day goes by you can't watch probably more than one game of football.
Yeah.
So and again, the only way you got to see your heroes was going to a football match.
Yeah.
So, and that's assuming you could afford it, obviously. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That's good to hear that you love you know you loved your football because you loved playing it. You know, and it wasn't just about going to watch it.
Oh, listen, I spent 20 seasons probably playing Sunday League football, at Sunday morning football, pub football as people call it, where I was paying £2 to play. You know, getting up and travelling to Fleetwood, which is sort of, you know, 40-minute drive away on a Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. Yeah. Absolutely loved. And a lot of that time I played with, I had a competitive game on a Saturday. I did play in the top division on a Sunday for about 4 years, but most of my Sunday football was playing in the lower leagues, mainly with my friends, just to because I loved it. Yeah. So this is, you know, like I said, I'm just a normal guy. You know, I'm just a normal guy. Loves his football, and never been about anything other than that.
And they got a great history as well, haven't they? North End, they've got a great history, and I didn't realise until a few years ago that that Tottenham's kit was a tribute to Preston North End, the white, the navy, and the white socks. What was in a way in recognition of because they won the double. Yeah,
I think they've
won the double.
The founding clubs as well, aren't they? At the end of the day, one of the oldest clubs in the football league.
And it was, and that's why they copied the kit, so to speak, in recognition that they were the great, you know, they were a great club at the time. Yeah. So, at what stage then? I'm going to go for the glasses here. The vanity's going out the window now. The glasses are going on. So, when was your introduction to the football coach Barry Bennell?
Yeah, I was 11 years old. At that stage, all the football managers that I'd come across were sort of, you know, really somebody's dad, or, you know, fag hanging out, bit of a beer belly, you know, just some 40-year-old bloke. And it was, you know, an ex-school teacher or something or other. And then went to a Butlins holiday camp. And during that stay, Butlins was really popular in the 70s and 80s. You know, it was the place to go almost in England. Went to the camp. It's actually Pwllheli in North Wales, and we've been there many times before. And there was a football coaching, and it was really big. I mean, it's I tell people the story. It's difficult to imagine how big it was, but you know, it was sponsored by the Daily Express. There was ex or current professional footballers that were going down to these sessions and getting involved one day a week and stuff. You know, the likes of Kevin Keegan and people like that have turned up at Pwllheli in the past, and you would get involved in a session that ran every day during the course of that week, and at the end of the week there would be a Boy of the Week presentation, and whoever won the Boy of the Week was invited back at the end of it was all seasonal in them days. So the last week, I think it was about the second week in September, they got all the Boy of the Weeks together and had a Boy of the Year.
Yeah.
And they ended up actually winning the Boy of the Year a few years later, but you were then sort of taken off to a trial at Manchester United, and it was a really big thing. Anyway, get there, first day, came across this it was like just a ball of energy. Very, very similar in appearance to sort of Keegan in his day with a big perm. Very athletic guy. Very young was the thing that sort of struck me. It turns out now that I think he was 23, 24 years old at the time, which I think is really important that people realise, because I think people have this perception of sex offenders being older, and a lot older at that, you know, in the 40s and the 50s, and some sort of weird guy, and this is as far from a weird guy as you can imagine. This is a guy who's heterosexual. The mums loved him, but he was like, and I've heard this description before, like the Pied Piper. You know, he walked around camping between sessions, and kids would be following him. I mean, you know, that's no exaggeration. Yeah. Kids were drawn to the sessions, and he paid me a lot of attention in those first few days. There was boys up to 14 could play, and I was only 11, and there was a lot of bigger lads there, and as such, not necessarily technically better, but physically. And you know, it was difficult to compete with a lad 2 years older than you know. But he made a real shine for me. He made a real beeline for me. And my dad had my dream. Never a pushy dad, but he had my dream. He wanted his son to be a pro footballer, you know.
Like many others, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, just to emphasise, he wasn't pushy in any way. My dad was a winger and played rugby very briefly until he badly broke his collarbone at 17. I think that's where I got my. But he'd already played for Fylde's first team, and he was a very promising. Played for Lancashire, very promising, very quick winger, and he'd always wanted his best for his lads, you know. And he came to watch the sessions, and if you will, Barry started speaking to him, telling him how good I was, how I was a little star, and that he was involved with Manchester City, and he ran junior teams in his area that he would like me to go down and trial for and to play for. At the end of that first week, we'd exchanged sort of addresses to keep in touch. But I didn't actually win the Boy of the Week. But I'd probably won a bigger thing in the fact that I was going to be looking at, you know, being involved with Manchester City.
Yeah.
But I was gutted. You know, there's no other word for it. I was pretty devastated, to be honest, not to win. And I've always had that fight, which I think you've obviously got to have as a sports person in any. You've got to have a desire and a passion. And I think that came through with the criminal justice system later as well. But I've always had that, and I was determined to go back. We'd never had 2 holidays ever in 1 year. It just wasn't.
What year this was, David?
Yeah, 79.
79. Okay.
So I'd never been on 2 holidays in a year, but I persuaded my parents and badgered them, and my dad was right on board, to be fair. And we went back, first week in September of 79. And all that time in between, we've been writing to each other. And he'd given me, he told me to do this Magnificent 7 trick and make sure I could master it by the time I went back. And the Magnificent 7 was something where you kept the ball up on your right foot to your right knee, shoulder, head, shoulder, left knee, left foot. So you went round the body, 7 touches of the ball, and I just had my 12th birthday and I could master that and I could do it. And he used to be able to do it round and round. His touch of the ball was incredible. And I think now they call it, I forgot what they call it now, but basically freestyle.
Freestyle.
There's a lot of players, a lot of people can do unbelievable things with the football, but he was doing them in 1979. And in 1979, it was not known as such. You know, he'd be doing the press ups with the ball on the back of his neck. He'd flick it up like you've seen the Brazilians do. And it was mesmerizing. And you wanted to be him. You know, I've said it a million times, he became my hero instantly. And I think that's, you know, it's crucial because people talk about the grooming process and people talk about, you know, how these people win people over. And in most cases, they do that over a period of time. And they do that by ultimately, you know, possibly, obviously treating the person really well, but also maybe buying them presents, doing all sorts of different things to groom a child. Lots of lavish attention, and a lot of that he did. He certainly gave me some free football shirts, and in those days I only ever got a football shirt for Christmas or my birthday. So for some guy just to open the boot of his car and give me football shirts in front of my dad, you know, it wasn't hidden. It was like, you know, your Christmases have come at once. You know, it's incredible. But I was groomed just off the fact that he was a professional football coach. You know, he didn't need to do anything else. He had my dream just there in his hand, and ultimately I was groomed without the rest of the traits that he groomed me with it eventually. And the second week at Butlins, he was incredibly lavish in his praise towards me, and always sort of showing me, letting me do all the drills for the other kids and what have you, you know, really making me the forefront of everything that he did. And I felt $1 million. And he gave me the Boy of the Week trophy. And there's a picture that's been out in the media for many years now of me and him together, as me as a young boy. That was at the front of my scrapbook for many years. It was the first time I'd ever been in the paper as, you know, a picture. I'd had write-ups and stuff, but it's the first time I'd ever had a sort of big picture. And by winning this Boy of the Week, the local paper at my end picked it up, and there was a big picture of me and him, and a write-up and stuff. And, you know, I just felt $1 million, and I was in awe of the guy. And so was my dad, you know, and my brothers had seen him and done coaching with him as well, two of my brothers. So, yeah, as far from a paedophile as you could possibly imagine.
Well, I'm glad you stressed that point, to be honest, David, because I think we all have a perception, or certainly when I was growing up, you know, in 60s, early 70s, you know, the stereotypical view, as you say, an older man, it was very much the old raincoat, if you like. As you say, probably overweight, bespectacled, you know, greasy hair, and so on. And would never have thought that, you know, an average or more than an average guy, a good-looking guy, and then, you know, who clearly was attracted to women as well, that in any way that they would have any other thought process, if you like, or be attracted to anything else other than, or anybody else other than a female. And I'm glad in this day and age now that people are a little bit more perceptive. I mean, obviously I know there's social media, and there's been a variety of cases as well. But it goes to show how many people actually got away with it because they didn't fit the persona that most of us believed was a typical paedophile or sex offender or groom, or whatever term people want to use to individual cases. So how did that progress from somebody who came across to you pretty much like an idol? And clearly your father doesn't strike me as being a fool. So, you know, this man must have put some considerable effort into you know, conning you all, basically. I mean, they're probably more articulate words to use, but, you know, he was conning you. He was taking advantage of your trust, and clearly abused that. Yeah.
So we kept writing. He kept asking me to go down and play for his team, etc. Now, the reason that I couldn't do that at that stage was I was playing myself for a very established team in the area. It was the same day, but also it was my dad was chairman of that football club, and it was difficult for me to sort of do that. Plus, in those days, you tended to play your football within 5 or 10 miles of where you were. This guy's sort of 40 miles away, you know, Cheshire way, and it was a little bit too far. But he kept going on and on and on about me sort of going down, and we got to probably somewhere around the March of 1980, and the letter arrived, and it was about a soccer school that he was holding, that he was going to be the coach for in Macclesfield, and come down, spend a couple of nights, do the course, and you know, I suppose he'll establish how much I've improved and where we're at, and it'd be just good to touch base and spend some time together, you know, spend some time with me. And so never thought anything of it, you know. My dad never thought anything of it. In hindsight, you know, I've heard a lot of people now say, surely somebody, you know, but this is 1980 now. This is, like I said, you know, a wonderful, talented football coach. And it was you know, there was a legitimate course. There was a reason to go. And it was a Coca-Cola Silver Skills Award course. And they didn't have that course round my way. So it was one over on my mates, you know, it was one over on my brothers. It was a way of saying, you know what, I've got a silver Coca-Cola badge and what have you. So off I travelled. And I went up the evening before the course. My dad was working, so, you know, I didn't get there till maybe, I don't know, 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. The course was the next day. And then rather than my dad do two nights of traveling, his suggestion was your dad could then pick you up on the Saturday morning and just drive down leisurely and come and get you. So I went Thursday evening, came back Saturday morning. And from arrival, and this is the, you know, the bit that I sort of told police, making no illusions and no, I told police exactly the scale of this in 2013. He, from the door shutting, the only way I can describe it is he never left me alone. He was like a shadow. And it wasn't, I've got a brother who's nearly 7 years older than me, an eldest brother. And it wasn't sexual, you know, this is just like an older brother almost. And it didn't feel unusual for me. But he was always like, you know, sort of, he'd come and sit next to me on the couch. He would mess around with my shoulders. He'd play fight with me. He'd tickle me. He would be whipping me with a tea towel in the kitchen, sort of rolling it up and sort of whipping. He would be rubbing his bristle across my cheeks. And other than that, everything else was sort of not dissimilar to what my brother did with me. You know, and it just felt normal.
Did you, David? Did you feel that was part of his? How can I put it? Was that part of his approach? Do you think that was planned? That was a conscious to get you at ease, to almost be just like one of your brothers, to make you feel comfortable?
Yeah, definitely to make me feel comfortable. I mean, I don't know whether it was to be like one of my brothers, but it was definitely to get touchy feely.
Yeah.
I believe that, yeah, absolutely was part of his plan. And then, you know, it came to bedtime. Where I was sleeping was like, it was like in the lounge area, basically. There was like a bed behind the door. It was only a small flat area, which I now know to have been in Taxel Edge Children's Home, which is where he was working at the time.
Right.
Which was in his staff dormitory, if you will, his flat. And basically, I got into the bed. He was still in the room at the time watching TV. And then he turned, as up north, you see, we call it the big light. He turned the big light off, came bounding into the room and just jumped into the bed. And then within seconds, literally seconds, he's asking me to take my top off, and we're doing this thing where we're writing numbers. He's writing numbers. I've got my eyes shut and I've got to guess what number it is. And it went from numbers to letters to words to tickling, and progressed basically. and it was done methodically, very slowly, and ultimately continued to sexually abuse me. And then, you know, that happened on both evenings. And in between that, we'd been off to football. You know, on the second morning, I woke up and people ask, you know, you've got to remember, this is 1980. There wasn't any child awareness as such, child abuse awareness on, you know, in schools or anything. I knew, I believed I knew that what had happened was wrong. I didn't really understand it. Without getting graphic, I don't think I'd really understood what an erection was. I certainly had never seen a man's erect penis. I had never been anywhere, you know, in a situation like that, and it just wasn't right. And my older brother had talked about gay people, and I knew what a gay person was, but I didn't really understand it. But it was just wrong. It felt wrong. And then I went off to football, and all of a sudden I've got this guy lavishing me with praise again, telling me how wonderful I am to the other coach who's there, and making me feel $1 million, and all this is playing in my head. I came back, and from walking back in and being away from everybody else and walking back in the room, the same process started all over again. The following morning, my dad came. I was looking out the window waiting for him. He came, and my dad was a guy. I've been well raised. He would always go and talk, you know, to a football coach and literally as he was getting out of his car, I shut out the door to get to my dad. My dad was like, "Well, I just need to go and see Barry." I was like, "No, we need to go. You know, let's go." And it wasn't until police interview, all those years later, where my dad actually, I knew he would remember taking me, and I'll talk about the disclosure after, but I knew he would remember taking me, and I knew that he would remember picking me up and bringing me back. But he actually disclosed something I got no recollection of. And my first words to my dad, once he started driving off, my dad was a bit concerned and said, "Are you okay?" And I actually said, he was trying to get into bed with me, Dad. He was trying to get into bed with me, but I wouldn't let him. I wouldn't let him, Dad. And for whatever reason, at that stage, my dad left it at that. I know that my granddad, my mum's dad, had literally just passed. And I think the house was a bit of my mum was completely destroyed. Yeah. And I think in hindsight now, that maybe masked their son spending weeks upstairs in his bedroom on his own. So maybe that's the reason things weren't picked up on initially, or weren't picked up on at that stage.
That would make perfect sense, wouldn't it? That would make sense. I can certainly see that. I'm sure, a lot of the viewers would make the same. It would come to the same conclusion. So, when you went back to school, taking into account what had happened, did you feel it impacted upon your education or just your day-to-day, getting up to go to school, your friendships with other people, particularly other boys as well? I mean, did this affect your, sorry if I'm making more than one question, but did this impact on your own sexuality in any way? Did you have any doubts about your own sexuality?
Absolutely. It messed with me for years. it's still an issue now in relation to, at times, my own thought process. It's difficult to deal with to this day. I think that's what's really important about this. You know, for example, I'll give you some early examples. I had at that stage in my life never masturbated, and I came home and began masturbating on a regular basis. I literally found it really difficult to be with a man on his own, one-to-one, a teacher, or I found that incredibly difficult. But unlike a lot of people, and this is pretty much most people, if I'm honest, who are sexually abused, who maybe 70% of them might be within the family home. And I think that's important to get across, is, you know, most of this is going on by a dad, a stepdad, a mum, a sister, a brother, a grandma, a granddad, an uncle, somebody within that family home setup environment. But from my side of things, I had a very loving, stable home, and I was miles away from this guy. This guy had never been to my house, so I felt safe, whereas most of those people that I've just talked about won't.
No.
It will terrify them on a daily basis. And about a month later, I can't remember exactly, but around a month later, I came home from school and I bounded in the house, because obviously from my side of things, school is over and football's about to begin. So I came out, you know, came bounding in, and in those days we had a door. The first door on the right as you walked in the house was the front room, the best room. Nobody went in that room unless there was a guest. You were banned from that room, and I walked in and my mum was sat on the chair and the door was ajar, and I could see my mum sat on the chair, and she's like, come and see who's here. So I just presumed it was a relation, grandma, you know, whatever was in the room, hidden behind the door that I couldn't see that side of the room. So I bounded in, and as I walked in, he was sat having a cup of tea with my mum in my front room, sat on my couch, if you will, with a woman similar age to him, and it was genuinely terrifying, because all of a sudden he knew where I was. He knew my house. He was talking to my mum. He could gain access to me. Why was he here? You know, and that changed a lot for me that day. There's so much happened in my head psychologically because of him coming that day. For example, I went up. My mum told me to take him up and show him my trophies, which is a normal thing. My mum would always, you know, guests came to the house. Normally, it wasn't my mum, it was me. They didn't even get a chance to get through the door, and I'm saying, come and see my trophies. You know, I'm so proud of my trophy collection, you know, a young kid. And so I'm dragging people upstairs to go and see my trophies, and my mum suggested it, and well, pretty much told me to take him upstairs. And you know, I can remember it now. You know, I can remember it now so clearly. You got to remember, I wasn't 6 or 7 years old now. You know, I'm 12 and a half, 12 and 3/4. And it was get upstairs and get back downstairs as fast as possible. That was the only thing that was going through my head. And I got in, showed him my trophies, went to leave, and he just stood in the doorway. And he basically just said, it wasn't threatening me or anything. He just basically said, don't worry, you know, I won't tell your mum what you did to me. And that line in itself haunts me to this day. You know, it was like what I'd done to him. And would I, you know, how can I, you know, what do I do now? I can't tell anybody. And after that, after he'd gone, it took me months to want to come home from school. So I didn't want to go in the house. And when I was walking in the house, I was almost creeping in, terrified if the door was open, you know, of who was going to be in the room. And that's the sort of impact, you know, and that's just a first scale thing. The next thing is I'm growing a bit older now, and I'm thinking about my own sexuality. You know, I'm questioning who I am. And I was attracted to women, but I didn't feel right in what had happened to me. My own body reaction to what happened didn't sit right with me. And it was a case of, it was much easier to start knocking around with lads a year or two younger than me. Because my mates were starting to get, if you will, get into girls. And they were starting to move towards relationships with girls, the first first love, 14-year-old, you know, that sort of. And I was like, I was lost. So I started knocking around with 12-year-old lads who were still wanting to play on the park. And you know, they were still into that, you know, I can be a footballer dream, whereas a lot of my mates at 14, 15 were then giving up on that dream and starting to move on. So, you know, you talk about how it's affected you, and that's just me, you know, that's just the way it affected me. I didn't have necessarily the fear of going in the house every day after a while that other kids will have, that, you know, that are abused in that family home on a regular basis. You got to remember, some people are, you know, they're abused for years and years. It's incredible.
Did any of your friends of your own age group, did they pick up on that at all? I mean, they clearly didn't know what had happened, but did anybody ever make a comment, you know, that you weren't so obviously pursuing girls like they were, if you like, and that you were still, did you get away with it because you were known to love football so much?
Exactly.
It wasn't so strange that you continued to play football.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It was my dream. And I hid behind that dream. You know, I suppose I hid behind the dream's not really right, but it's true. You know, it was a dream and I still wanted it. But at the same time, it was a good cover story for me.
I got to 15, 16 and was probably going to watch football more than actually still playing it. And I met my wife when I was 15 and she was already, she was coming up to 16. So, and we're still together to this day. And I can remember my mates coming round and knocking on the door and saying, Frank, you're coming out to play football. And I said, no, I've got a bird in here, and I've got a girl in here. And they were like, they called me a puff. You know, it's not a word you hear a lot these days, but, you know, back in the early 70s. So there was these half a dozen fellas, you know, standing there calling me a puff. And I thought, I don't think you get this, fellas, do you? I've got a girl in here. You're all fellas together going to play football. You're the puffs, not me. But that was the perception, wasn't it? Football was really, it was so important, wasn't it? It was more important than anything else, you know. I like to think that some of them actually did get girlfriends eventually, and you know, and did marry. But yeah, I can see from your perspective why, yeah, that was probably a good cover, wasn't it? Because the expectation was that you had the love of football, and so therefore not so noticeable.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I still knocked about with them in school, so you know, you can't change a year. So ultimately, I was still friends with them, and I saw them, but it was that sort of time periods where, you know, Saturday afternoon where they go off looking for girls and sort of in their little gangs walking around the town centre because there wasn't really much to do. Yeah, it was that time that I'd be like, no, I'm playing football, and that's the end of it. And after a while, people give up asking you, you know, they just get on with, well, he's not going to come, so let's not bother. So yeah.
Although you continued to play the football, did you, whether by design or accident, did you actually meet anybody? Was there somebody that you met, or did that come much later in? I mean, somebody in your teens, or did it come much later in life?
No, I think it's fair to say that last year at high school, I met sort of my first girlfriend, if you will. So I wouldn't say necessarily a late developer, but certainly not as, you know, a lot of my mates were 2 years before that. And but it was difficult. It was difficult for me to to understand it. You know, unless it's happened to you. You know, when I had my first, if you will, bout of counselling, after I disclosed to police in 2013, it was one of the first issues that I raised. You know, why did my body do this? And since then, I've spoken to a few people, and there's lots and lots of people that have told me otherwise. And, you know, people with letters behind their names and in front of their names and all sorts, telling me that it's a normal reaction. You're a kid, it's part of your body, it happens. And that's great. But a heterosexual guy it doesn't sit right. And ultimately, it's been difficult over the years to deal with that. And that's why, you know, I'm not trying to put people off watching and listening to these podcasts, but it's important that people understand that the psychological, the emotional, and the feelings of the individuals who are abused, it doesn't go away. It doesn't just go away the next day. You know, you break your arm, 6 weeks in plaster, your arm's back. Some things are really difficult to sort of get over.
So when you was with a girl, for example, and we'll say if you reached a stage where you were petting, I think, you know, the word we'd use back in those days, you know, and then it becomes a little bit heavier, and then you may have an expectation, or the girl may well have an expectation. Did at any time, say you took the lead, for want of a better way of putting it, was there ever a time where you felt, oh my God, am I taking advantage of this person because of your urges, your needs, or were things still quite normal in that respect?
Yeah, there was never. I mean, I've never been a forward guy, if you will. So there's never been any issues like that. But I'll give you another example. 2008. After 17 years, my first marriage broke down.
Right.
And, you know, I'm not a young bloke at that stage. I'm 41. Was I 41? Yeah. 41 years of age. And the first things that came to my head once I'd got over the initial issues, if you will, that most people have, were that I would have to meet a new partner. And that terrified me. I'm 41 years of age. And it was terrifying because although my ex-wife was never aware, certain things that probably happened within that bedroom were very much controlled by me in relation to how things progressed. And years later, you're then thinking, well, how do I stop this from happening now? How do you, when I wasn't going to disclose at that stage to obviously my new partner, who happens to be my new wife. So you talk about impact again. I'm 41 years old, and I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to get around her if she wants to do this or she wants to do that? You know, it's difficult, and something that I've personally struggled with.
Yeah, I had a conversation with somebody yesterday, funny enough, and I gave an example where when I'd come out of prison, and still with the same woman, you know, the same woman I met when I was 15, and I came home to a different house for a start, different surroundings, and it all been decorated, newly furnished. In fact, everything in the house was new, except my wife, if you like. And so you come home and she shows you the house, and you have a cup of tea. And then, of course, there comes a time during the course of the evening, you've got to go to bed. And you go up the stairs and you have a shower. And you don't hear men talk about this very often, if at all. you suddenly get into bed. Now, how do you treat this woman? How do you treat this woman? You know, if, for want of a better way of putting it, if you ravage her, this is just a frustrated bloke who's come out of prison? It could be anybody. You know, it could be a brass from King's Cross. You know, but you don't want to make your wife feel like that, do you? You certainly don't want to make the person you love feel like that.
Yeah.
And if by the same token, you get in that bed, you go nowhere near her, you make no moves whatsoever, she could then think you've gone off of her. She could think you've been in contact with somebody else while you've been away, in prison. And it's a very difficult. Unfortunately, in my case, because we had been together so long, and we pretty much knew each other, inside out, and the trust between us, that we got over that. We got over that situation. But I can't imagine what it must have been like for you to have been in a relationship and then identified some things you felt were not quite right, and we're going to have to find how to approach that during throughout the course of it. That must have been very, very difficult. Very difficult.
I think it's just a situation where it's if you will, easier not to talk about. So I didn't.
No.
I just, I suppose you could say, led the foreplay.
Yeah.
And ultimately, made things happen, I suppose you could say, in a certain way.
Yeah.
So that, that's just another thing. And my wife speaks frankly now, if you will, about
you should be on here if she wants to speak frankly.
About the fact that once I'd disclosed, things started to make sense to her a little bit. And it's not a comfortable subject for her. And it's not a subject we talk about a lot. She ultimately supports me in doing what I'm doing.
Brilliant.
But it's not a subject that's raised in the house over tea. Let's put it that way.
David, can I ask you, at what point of your life did you suddenly learn that this fellow, I find it even hard to say his name, had been identified for what he was, or certainly suspicious that was put upon him that he was an abuser?
Yeah. There was a TV program about abuse within football, and it was a dispatches program. It was released in, I think, in '97, and it centralized around Bennell, and the fact that he had been arrested and convicted in America in, I think, 1994. And while he was serving time in America, they, I suppose, decided, due to things that had come up in that case, that there's a possibility that this could be much bigger. So they started an investigation back in the UK, even while he was serving time in America. And during that investigation, there was boys disclosing. And the program came out talking about, I think it was six boys had disclosed. And when he was, if you will, extradited from America after serving his sentence in America, he was rearrested and eventually convicted for offences in the UK. The 9 years to 9 years sentence for what I believed at that stage was for abusing 6 boys. It turns out that during that period, there was actually 23 people had come forward. Most of them, or a lot of them, weren't used as part of the case, but they ultimately the prosecution offered him a plea deal, and he was given a 9-year sentence. Now, the investigation was talking about, it was with Deborah Davis, the reporter, and it was talking about, I suppose, the clubs knowing even back then, and there was one particular survivor who was vocal and showed and gave away his anonymity to talk on the program, and it was during that program that I first became aware of this situation, and I went to pick my young son up from my mum's house, and after seeing the program, my head was all about disclosing. I was at a place in my life where I felt that I was ultimately ready to disclose. In fact, I was more than ready to disclose, to be honest. I'd always wanted justice. I'd always known as I'd grown what he'd done was wrong. And ultimately, I went to my mum's house, and my mum had seen the program, and she confronted me. My son was only 1 at the time. And she just asked me outright, did anything happen to you when you were there? And I basically said, no, Mum, it didn't. And the words, I've said this before at interviews, the words after that kept me silent, because she said, she's, thank God, because she's not sure if she would have been able to cope if it had. And I got out to my car with my son, and I'm putting him in the car seat, and I'm just thinking to myself, I can't disclose after hearing that. What, it'll kill my mum. And I made make no bones about it, I made a secret promise that day that I would never disclose while my mum was alive.
Right.
My mum and dad had split up at that stage. My mum and dad split up when I was 18, which was a very difficult time, but we still had a relationship with both. I lived with my mum, but I saw my dad regularly, and it was my dad obviously was not aware of that conversation, because he wasn't anymore in the family home. So I decided to keep it quiet, and it wasn't until June of 2012 now that we've jumped to, right, that my mum told me and my brothers that she'd been diagnosed with cancer. We pretty much already knew it anyway, because she'd been losing weight and struggling for a good 12 months, 2 years even prior to that. She'd had a series of tests done, nothing seemed to be showing up, but ultimately we thought that maybe she had cancer, and it was diagnosed, we were told, in the June, and then in the September it was diagnosed as terminal.
Right.
And I'd rekindled, if you will, a very close relationship with my mum, because my marriage split in 2008. I went and spent 2 years back at home while everything was being dealt with, and finances were being dealt with, and houses were being sold, and that 2 years, it was really strange, because you have a second relationship with your mum, a different relationship, and we got very close. I'd always been a dad's dad, really, a dad's lad. I'd always been, my dad was the person who took me to football, so yeah, my dad was the one who won my heart. My mum just did everything else: the cooking, the cleaning, the washing, the ironing, the dusting, the clean. She was the rock of the family. But you love your dad because he takes you to football. It's incredible when you look back now and you think, hang on a second, I've got this wrong. Maybe I should have loved my mum a bit more. But I just don't think, you're a kid. You don't appreciate your mum the same, and especially in them days. And then second time, I'm blown away by the love. I mean, I really needed that at that stage. I was going through a rough time, and it was fantastic. So I had a really good relationship with my mum. And then when she was passing away, I said to my Teresa, if you will, my wife, and I said, I'm going to go every day now. I'm going to spend as much time as I can with her. As soon as I finish work, I'm going to pop down and see my mum. And I did every day until she passed. But there was a thing going on in my head all the way through, from the day we were told she was terminal. I began to, I don't know whether prepare is the right word, but get ready to disclose. I was always going to disclose, and it was about sort of when and how I did it. And I kept thinking, well, I know quite a lot of, I was working in a large leisure community centre. At the time, it's quite established in the community. I knew a lot of people in the area that I was working in St Anne's and St Anne's. And I thought, I can't go to my local police station. So where do you go to disclose abuse? I couldn't talk to anybody. Nobody in the world knew. It was only me.
Yeah.
And in the end, I made this decision that, do you know what, I'm going to go to Macclesfield to disclose, because that's where it took place. And in hindsight, unbelievably, it turns out that it's a really good decision to do that, because you're then disclosing the police investigation is done in the area that they can completely control the whole situation. Yeah. Whereas if you go over county barriers, you've got all sorts of different polices getting involved, and I had no idea of any of that. I'd never been in a police station in my life. So I decided that that's what I was going to do. And my mum had photos, my mum had certificates and bits and bobs, and I'm looking around for any evidence, anything that I could prove that linked me to him. And my mum's in a bed, and she's dying. She's disappearing, if you will, in front of my eyes. And I'm thinking about disclosing and looking around the house for stuff and pictures, and it was terrible. It was a terrible period. And then she passed, and she passed in the January of 13. And I literally spoke, all my brothers spoke at the funeral. And I read out a sort of poem that I'd written. I don't know if you class it as a poem, but in the middle of it was quite long. It probably took about 3 or 4 minutes to read. And in the middle of it, I said a sentence that I promised I'd keep it secret, but it's almost my time. And my eldest brother and my son, who's obviously grown at that stage, both confronted me at the wake. And they said to me, what was all that about? I promised to keep it secret, but it's almost my time. And I just said, exactly that. I promised I'd keep it secret, but it is almost, it gets quite emotional saying it, to be honest. But it's almost my time. And I said, you'll know one day. And the funeral, I think it was a Thursday, but it was certainly 5 days later. I booked a week's annual leave off work. I was in the leisure industry. January is always the busiest month of the year because of Commit to Get Fit and everybody getting fit in the new year. So January is always the busiest month of the year in leisure. And so I always take the first week in February, or in those days, I took the first week in February off annual leave to sort of recover from the mad January. And I'd got this week planned anyway. So I just said to my fiance at the time, Teresa, who I'm now married to, I just said, look, I need to do something on the Monday. The rest of the week I'm yours, but I need to do something on the Monday. I can't tell you what it is, but I'll tell you after. And she accepted that. She had no idea that morning I set off to Macclesfield police station, walked in and disclosed non-recent sexual abuse by a football coach in what I believe their area. And that started a process that at the time, in 2013, I genuinely believed the police were on board. And the police officer that was dealing with me was empathic. She listened. She was warm, and I felt listened to and believed. And an investigation started. Didn't really have witnesses to speak to as such. There wasn't a huge investigation to do. There was my dad really to speak to, which they told me from that day I couldn't speak to my dad about anything about this subject, because they didn't want me to put words in his mouth to inform him. They wanted to hit him cold. And a while later, some officers from Blackpool went to speak to my dad, and that's when he disclosed about me getting in the, what I said when I got in the car.
Yeah.
I remember clearly me taking me, I remember clearly bringing me back. And the, you know, the interactions at Butlins, and he remembered stuff that I didn't remember at the time, about him being involved with youth players at Chelsea. He was a youth player himself, Benno at Chelsea as a kid, and I couldn't remember stuff like that, but my dad remembered it really well. I just saw him as a brilliant football coach. And it was the June of 2013, and CPS threw out the case. And what confused me, and that's the only word for it really at that stage, is because I didn't know the process. I'd never even heard of the words public interest. And I got a letter, and the letter said, "We believe you. The evidence test is met." Now, you know, when I still tell people, I say, just let that sink in for a second. You know, the evidence test is met. They also said in that letter that I was credible, that they believed that I would make a good witness in court, if you will. I was a professional guy, you know. I haven't got a drink issue. I'm certainly not on drugs in any way, shape, or form. And you know, I'm a respected member of the community, and so they believe me. They know they feel I've been sexually abused. They believe that I'm credible, but they're not going to take this to court. And the reason they're not going to take it to court is because they said if I'd have come forward at the same time as the other boys during the investigation, if my case would have gone in amongst all that lot, all those other boys, it probably wouldn't have added much weight to the sentence. And because it wouldn't have added much weight to the sentence, they didn't feel it was in the public interest to re-prosecute somebody for a sexual crime. Well, when I was reading it, again, I've said this a few times, it was like reading something in German, and I can't read German. It just made no sense. What you're saying is you're sexually abused, but because you didn't come forward years earlier, we don't think it's fair. What did police not get about you? Do you disclose when you're ready? There are thousands and thousands and thousands of people that I've spoken to, you know, and seen reports of that will not disclose while their parents are alive. No. There are so many people that will disclose when they're ready, for whatever reason it is, and you can't just presume that someone should have come forward. I didn't know about that investigation, by the way, in England. It was centralised in Cheshire and Manchester area. Nobody contacted me. Nobody made any contact with me. I wasn't aware of that investigation taking place. How could I have got involved in that investigation if I don't know about it? So I demanded to see, I think demanded is the right word, to see the CPS official that had made the decision. Because at the bottom of the letter it said I can have a meeting with the CPS. So I wanted to speak to that person. I wanted to look her in the eyes and say, so you think I'm been sexually abused, but you don't think it's in the public interest? Let me tell you how it is. And I'd already told police there will be hundreds, and that's, make no bones about it. I've got emails that prove the fact that I'm telling them there'll be many, many boys. And they've thrown out the case against Benno. Barry Bennell's off the hook. He's completely scot-free. He's going abroad. He's living the life. He's changed his name. He's now called Richard Jones, and he's living in Milton Keynes. Nobody in Milton Keynes has got any idea who he is. This is 2013, and he's living a normal life. And they just let it go. And so I wasn't prepared to do that. And what I did was I asked for the meeting, and at the meeting, the lawyer who'd made the CPS official who'd made the decision mysteriously wasn't in the meeting anymore. And I got her two line managers, and the two line managers couldn't look at me. I went with my wife, and I basically pulled them apart. And I said, you know, I demanded there'd be minutes taken. They refused to take minutes. They refused to let me record the meeting. In the end, they said that they would put an official in the room to take some minutes. but there would be a brief overview of what happened in the room. And even though they weren't complete minutes, they clearly are registered within my minutes to this day, that I told them there will be hundreds of boys, that the investigation into Jimmy Savile unearthed 589 people, I think, and that he'd been coaching for 16 years, that he was infatuated with me, that he was obsessed with me, and that they need to look at this more carefully and open up an investigation. They still refused, but I was told that there was a national review panel that literally had just been created. When I say literally, I'm talking weeks before. So I said, well, I'll go to the panel. I need to go to the panel. And I went home and wrote this huge email. I was quoting human rights. I mean, this is me with no education. I haven't got a clue about anything to do with the criminal law. I'm quoting all sorts of different stuff that I'm reading on the internet that I don't even understand. But ultimately, on the CPS's own website at the time, on their own website at the time, it said cases of prosecution are more likely if the individual is 12 years or under. I was 12. If the person is in a position of trust, he was my football coach, I was staying at his house. If the person has got previous similar offences. So in one case, they're saying, well, he's actually been convicted. It's not worth being convicted. And on the website, it's saying if they've got similar convictions. And also if there's a period of grooming, if it's premeditated. And this is grooming. Every single box on their list to prosecution was ticked. And they still dropped the case. So I quoted everything and waited. And the meeting was held, it was the first ever meeting of the panel, was held in the September of 13. And there was a lead from the CPS on it, a lead from the police on it. And then there was other people from different criminal organizations, if you will, different parts of the criminal justice system are on this panel. There's sort of 5 or 6 of them. And it's quite high ranking. And they get together and discuss any cases that have come through. And obviously mine was the one, if you will, that had come through on that particular occasion. And then you hear nothing. And anybody who's gone through the justice system after disclosure will realise how slow the justice system is. Every day is like a year. And when you're waiting weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, you know, it's you're trying to function, you're trying to carry on the life, you're trying to earn a living. You know, I've got a job here, and I'm not sponging for a living here. This is somebody who's grafting and has got a responsible job in the community, and I'm really trying to function. Bear in mind, throughout that process, the only people who were aware were my wife, or she was my fiance at the time, my dad, my brothers, and Teresa's mum and dad. Nobody else in the world had any idea. I didn't tell anybody else because I didn't want to start telling people if there was no need. Why disclose to the whole world and tell everybody if there was no need to do that, if the case was going to get dropped? And the only reason my case was going to get dropped was because of maybe evidence. You know, that in my head, that was the only way. I didn't even know what public interest was. So I was determined to get it over the line, if you will. And after about 10 days, I contacted the panel and said, look, well, what's going on? You know, what's the delay here? And this guy said to me, it's really positive. You know, we're going out to organisations to look at the public interest in cases such as yours. And it will be re-looked at the next meeting. And the next meeting was January. Now, when you start thinking about a next meeting will be a week away or 2 weeks away, when you're told in the sort of September it's January, I can't even imagine. You know, I can't tell you where my head was at during that period. And you wait, and then January comes. You know the day of the meeting's taking place, and you're still waiting, and you're waiting for days and days after again, same sort of situation. And then you're contacted to say that due to new guidance that's been brought in England on the back of your case, we've decided to change the guidance basically. And because of that, this guy's telling me that it could affect hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in the future, because cases where a minimal sentence may be heard will be seen as more in the public interest to take the cases forward. Didn't mean anything to me, and without being selfish, and I wasn't really bothered about anybody else at that stage. It was about me and my case, and then they're told, well, I thought they charged him. I didn't really understand how it worked, and you're told that no, all that happens is the guidance has changed. They now will recommend that CPS take a second look.
Right.
This is the CPS that over the last 6 months had just been going through a massive complaint system in the way that they handled me, and so much more to tell the story. But I thought, well, what's the point? What is the point in going back to the same CPS who clearly now dislike me because I've gone right through their complaints procedure? They're just going to kick it out. And it took about 5 weeks, I think, to get any correspondence back. Longest period of my life. And then eventually this correspondence came back saying, due to the new guidance, we are going to instruct Cheshire Police to charge Bennell with 4 offences towards yourself. And that email changed my life. And what happened next is incredible, really, because that was in the March of 2014. I'm then told shortly afterwards that it's going to go to court, if you will, and that system takes from I think it was the April of 14 to the April of 15 to get him into Crown Court. And during that process, he pled not guilty all the way.
I've not, excuse me interrupting, David, I've not sworn up to now, and it's been very, very difficult not to do. But it's just come out there, bastard. I make no apology for that. That's my gut. My gut feeling is bastard. Go on.
Yeah. Well, I feel the same, trust me.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do.
So April 14, you're told that your case is going to go through the courts. It goes to magistrate first, and then eventually through to Crown, and you await your date. And the date was coming for April, and I'll be honest, at that stage, I'm really determined to go into court. I want my day in court, and I decided that I never wanted to see him again. I didn't want to see. We talked about before about how has it impacted, and during my early years, I had his face almost. If I closed my eyes, I saw his face.
Yeah,
and I've had issues with that throughout my life, but I never wanted to see his new appearance. I'm trying to explain that to people, but I've always had that picture of him in my scrapbook, and I suppose I've had to live with that picture. And I have lived with that picture, and I've been able to cope with that picture, but I didn't want a new picture, and I didn't want a new image, and that's difficult maybe for some people maybe to get, but I didn't want that. And so I said, look, I need to go into the courtroom. I don't want to do it on a computer sort of somewhere in a room in the court. I don't want to be out there. I want to go in. I want to hear him. I just don't want to see him. But I need to go and tell these 12 people what he's done to me. And I want to, I've got no issues in talking to some barrister who thinks he's going to rip me apart, because he's not, because I'm going to tell him exactly what he did to me. And I'm very determined in that way. And he'd maybe even angrier, pleading not guilty all the way. It frustrated me. It was like, that's the worst thing he could have done, really, for me. It was to push me, because it just made me more determined. So that was the way it was going to be. And I'm stood at the back of Chester Crown Court. It's a boiling hot day, April 2015. I'm with my brother, and we're stood literally at the back. And the way it had been organised is the police lady, the officer in charge, would ring me and tell me when to make my way through to the courts, because I didn't want to go in and just hang around in a courtroom. I was under special measures. I didn't want to see him. So that's the way it was going to be. And I'm stood there and the phone started ringing, and I actually started walking towards the courtrooms, which I was literally at the back of. And this officer's saying, "Oh, it's fantastic news. It's fantastic news. He's just pled guilty. You don't have to come in." And I just went, "Well, that's not fantastic news. I want to come in. I want to come into court. I want to, this is a guy now who's going to get if he was going to get a custodial sentence." In my head, I'm thinking, well, he's not now, because this is all going to look favourably. He's done this to tick a box. And that's the way I felt. And I'd heard these stories before. I'm not a young kid anymore. I'd heard these about people doing this to get lighter sentences, and I was absolutely devastated that day. It's supposed to have been a happy day, and I was devastated because I wanted a load of press around it. I wanted media in the courtroom. I knew how big this was going to be, and it's taken away. It was taken away from me. So I'd already made a decision that I was going to do a personal victim statement. But I wasn't sure at that stage until that day whether I was actually going to go and read it. Again, it would be behind a screen, but I wasn't sure whether I was just going to leave it with a judge but that completely changed that day. I wanted to go into the courtroom and read my statement, because I'd been deprived, if you will, of my opportunity. And while I understand that opportunity would be great for some victims, and it would put some victims at ease that they don't have to go through that process, and that wasn't the case with me. I wanted to go into court, so I turned up at Chester Crown Court for the sentencing. This is now May of 15, because they keep you waiting for a month. So I walked into the side entrance at Chester where I'd been arranged to meet, and I was going to get whisked up into a room away from the main courtroom and told to wait there until it was time. And that's what happened. And victim services met me and took me up to this room. Everything was going according to plan, no problems. And then an elderly gentleman came and got me. And he walked me down these spiral cases and these sort of corridors and stuff. And eventually, as we approached this door, there's a piece of glass in the door. And I could see a bit of a side profile of a bloke at the other side of the door. And it'll live with me forever. I knew instantly that was him. Then he opened this big door and just said, "Take a seat there." And he basically pointed to the left. And then he walked off, and he left me in a passageway a couple of yards, I don't know, whatever, away from him. Just me and him, nobody else, just me and him alone. And I'd only ever, from the whole start of the process, I'd only ever asked for one thing, and that was that I never wanted to see him. That's the only thing I ever asked of anybody. I didn't want to see him, and there I am. And then the guy opened the door to my left, a court official, opened the door and basically looked straight at me and said his name, and he presumed that I was him. And he was asking me to go into court, and I was like, "It's not me." And then he asked me again. I said, "It's not me." And then I could sense this person coming from this side, and then he came out, and they literally, and I'm not exaggerating, they had a conversation over the top of my head while I was sat, and he was close enough to touch at this stage. He was then taken into court. I completely fell apart. completely. I was distraught. And you're only talking seconds, and the door opened again. And the guy came and he said, right, you need to come in now. And I was actually physically crying. I said, I can't go in there. And he said, you need to come in now. And I said, I can't. I was never supposed to see him. And he said, well, you're going to have to come in. And professional Dave, was, if I don't go in now, I might never be able to do this. I might lose my chance.
Yeah.
So I got to that door, and just as I was walking in, I said, but the screens are up, aren't they? And with that, I wasn't manhandled out of the court, but I was sort of, basically a door was shut in my face, if you will. And there was a big commotion in court, and he had to be led back out a different entrance while the screens are put up, because anybody who's been in the Crown courtroom will realise that you have to walk to the screens. The screens don't come all the way to the door. So he had to be escorted back out of the room to allow me to get into the room, to get behind the screen, and then he's brought back in. The judge was fantastic, and after very, very, very soon in his summary, he basically said, you will be going to prison today. And that was the only thing. He was eventually given a 2-year sentence, of which 12 months must be in prison. And it's difficult when people say, are you happy with the sentence? Of course, I'm not happy with the sentence, but this is a guy who'd got off. This is a guy who initially was never going to go to prison. So to get 12 months was some sort of justice. But more importantly, as I was walking out of that courtroom, the police officer who led the case came up to me. And my first words to her were, tell me there was media in that courtroom. Tell me there was somebody in there. And she said that there was a journalist in there.
Right.
And that's all I needed. That night, after bitterly complaining to Chester Crown Court, putting in an official complaint, which went right to the top and has changed guidance in the way that they escort people under special measures. In the north of England, the whole north of England prisons have changed their system on the back of that, which is great, and it's great for others, but it's not great for me. And I still see him to this day. I still see him, but ultimately, that night there was articles starting to appear online. Macclesfield Express, Chester Chronicle, Manchester papers, Milton Keynes papers. We're all starting to replicate the article that the Macclesfield Express had published on their sites. And I knew that it would go bigger. So I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited. And April 2016 then came, which is 11 months after the conviction. And it was me that instigated it. I sent an email to the police officer, and I said, 2 things. Please, can you tell me, has anybody else actually come forward? And secondly, when is he released? And the first part was about the release. She said, I don't know. And I now know that she could have found out for me, but she just didn't bother. And the second part was, yes, others have come forward, and I don't know when he's released, but if he is released, it won't be for long, because there's further prosecutions on the way. And it just went quiet after that, and I had to try and get on with my life. So what I did is I went off to Tunisia, and while I was 10 hotels further up the road, 39 people were gunned down on a beach on day 9 of my holiday. Fortunately, me and my wife were safe. but we saw all the aftermath, the ambulances, the helicopters, and the evacuation almost of Tunisia. Came back from that, and literally days were going by, and I was actually in a conference. I went over to a conference in Manchester, 2-day conference, and while I was up there, the first night, I think the polite term for it is networking. So we were doing a bit of networking in the pub after the first day of the conference, and nobody in that pub knew who what had happened, or the fact that Barry Bennell had just been convicted, and it was all quiet. Nobody knew. And my missus is ringing, and you know what it's like when you're in the pub and you've had a few beers and your missus is ringing. I was thinking, well, do I just red button this? Because I'd only spoken to her 3 hours before, and I just felt, for whatever reason, it's really strange, because I didn't ignore the call. I went outside and took it, and my missus is going on about, it's all over the media. There's a guy, and it's about Bennell, and I don't really understand it. And in my head, I'd asked to go to the media. I was going to keep my anonymity, but I wanted to go to the media. I asked police if I could go to the media, and they wouldn't let me. And this guy, he's now actively talking to the media, and I was like, I don't get it. But I was half cut, if I'm honest. I was in a pub and I'd had a few beers, so I thought, well, I'm going to have to wait till I get back to the room. So a couple of hours later, I got back to the room, and I was definitely worse for weather. And I got in there and I put my computer on, and I'm looking at this stuff, and it's about this bloke called Andy Woodward. And it turns out that he was one of the 1997 victims who led his case, helped the prosecution in that time. Right. So he wasn't a new case. He was able to tell his story because it was in the public domain. It was already out there.
Yeah.
But the reason his story was a 19-year-old, because that's what it was at the time. It was like a 19-year-old story. 19 years old story was seen as worthy of being put in the media, was because the reporter knew that this same offender for him as it was for me, was currently out on license. Right. But not only that, at the time he was on license for me, because he'd only been released in the May of that year. Yeah. This was the November. So he was on license, but also the next main, if you will, victim, the main person in the next case had already gone to CPS. The CPS they were awaiting the charge. Yeah. So all of a sudden, a 19-year-old story became very current. And because it was very current, and it was Manchester City, who were Premier League champions, right. You've then got a huge story. You've got an ex-professional footballer telling his story that's now very current. It's got further cases coming about a football coach at Manchester City. Right. So the media ate it up, and it was on. It was in the Guardian. And then it was on Victoria, Derbyshire the next day. Right. And all the things that came about after that, it just went mental. And I was sat in my house, and my missus is saying to me, this is probably 3 or 4 days after the story had broke. She said, you need to contact somebody, because I'd always wanted to tell the truth of what happened. And she said, you need to tell somebody. And I was like, what? David Lean just picks up the phone and, rings the Daily Mirror and says, I'm David Lean. Can I please tell you my story? And that's, anyone who knows me knows that that's not me. I would not do that. No. So I just sat there and I watched it day after day after day after day. And I think it was on about day 8. I came home from work, and there was an email, and the heading was something like Sky News. And I thought, well, it's trying to sell me something here, a package or something like you get. And so I clicked on it, and there's this unbelievable message, which basically said, the actual head of Sky News was sending it to me. Home News was sent me the email saying that she didn't want to go through reporters at that stage. She didn't want other people knowing. In theory, I was anonymous. It was impossible for them, in my eyes, for them to know who I was. But obviously, these people have ways of finding out things. And they found out who I was. They contacted me, and they said it was in fundamentally public importance that I told my story. Right. And if I wanted to, they would do it. And I got that request on a Thursday evening. I was interviewed on the Sunday by Paul Kelso, and on the Monday it was released.
Right.
And that's where the campaigning after came from. Right. Because I had no intention. I had absolutely no intention of campaigning afterwards, or that was never in my mindset at all. And within 48 hours of that interview going out on Sky, I'd been contacted via social media. And I was only on Facebook at the time. And I'd been contacted by about 150 people, 200 people, private messages saying, and most of them were almost exactly the same. Very courageous, thank you for doing that, brave to speak out, all these type of things. And then there was a disclosure in amongst it all by somebody. I'd worked at a place at that stage for over 30 years, and it was a big hub of the community. It was a big leisure complex hub of the community, and I'd seen generations grow up in that place, and people were contacting me saying, I've been sexually abused, I've never told a soul. And I was just in awe of what had happened, and the spiral effect, the domino effect, and people trusting me. And by the time I got through all the messages, there was 13 disclosures of people that I know.
God.
At that stage, I didn't think I knew a single soul in the world who'd been sexually abused. And there was 13, and within about another couple of weeks, it went to 15. And people kept shoving microphones in front of me and wanting to speak to me. And I just thought, do you know what? How can I not? How can I not speak out about this?
David, can I ask you a quick question? I don't even know how to describe this fella. I don't want to call him by his name, as I said before. I find it very difficult. Did he ever show any sign of remorse? Did he take any responsibility? He just seems to be quite content. He's done what he's done, and that's it. Yeah,
that's it. I mean, if you look at the 2018 case, which was widely publicised in the media, which there was 12, he was taken to court initially because the domino effect happened, and there was I believe triple figures came forward just about Bennell. So, then there was all the other survivors that were coming forward about other, and don't get me wrong, I'm not the first person to come forward about abuse within football. The difference between my case, if you will, and many of the others that have come before me, people have been prosecuted in England and Scotland prior to 2015. But the difference with mine was that it was the case, if you will, that the media grabbed. So ultimately, there's an awful lot of people that have done this prior to me, but because it was Bennell, and because it was Man City, and because there was a new case, coming. But then ultimately, from all these people, the police, and don't ask me why and how they even thought about doing this, but they decided to choose 12 cases that they presumably felt were very strong. That there was a lot of witnesses for, maybe that there was a lot of evidence, whatever. So they then took these 12 individuals through to a court, which went, the investigation and getting him to court took about 14 months again. And I think it started in February of 18. So yeah, he showed no remorse at that case at all. You know, he didn't plead guilty at that, but that's the first time he'd ever not pled guilty, and it went, you know, went to trial, if you will. So all those brave lads had to go and give their evidence. So then fast forward really to the day of the sentencing in 2018. So I went down to Liverpool during that case. I probably spent maybe 15 days in the Liverpool area, generally sat in a cafe across the road from Liverpool Crown Court, because I couldn't function at work. It sort of felt like my case in a way. I got to meet some of the guys for the first time that were involved in that case. I'd never spoken to, I didn't know a living soul when I went forward who'd been abused by him. I've never met anybody that had been abused by him, but I was all of a sudden starting to meet these blokes. And so basically, there's someone just come to my door, so there might be a dog barking, but so literally, I don't know, just met these blokes. And can I just wait a sec?
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, that's fine.
The dog's going mental here. I'll be gone in a sec. No, I think I'm okay. So just got a delivery. So
that's all right.
So yeah, so I'll start sort of, I suppose, from the top again, if you will. So I'm stood outside Liverpool Crown Court in the next case, if you will, 2018. And while I'm stood there, this reporter came up to me and said, "Did you know that during the 1997 case, there was 23 survivors and not 6?" And I was like, "No, I didn't know that." And they were like, "Yeah, not only that, but some of them weren't used in that case. And as such, they could have been used with your case in 2013. And I was like, "No, that can't be right." But I came home on the night when a lot of the lads, if you will, I think they were relieved more than celebrating, but they were going for a pint, and I went for a quick pint with a group of the lads that had just, the conviction had just, you know, we went for a pint, and then I went home. I went home on the train. I came back, I got in my house, and I'm typing away on the night that Benel's been finally convicted for 31 years. And I'm typing over to Cheshire Police to say, you know, is this right? It was the people that could have been used in my case. And eventually, after various emails backwards and forwards, the person who led that case is Sarah Oliver. She, for whatever reason, decided to take it upon herself to come to my house and meet with me. And while she was in my house, she said, no, there was all 23 were used. Some were laid on file, which means they couldn't be brought back in. But all those 23 were used. And then she said the words, "however," and I'm listening, and she said, there was a list provided by Barry Bennell himself after conviction in 1998. He, at Bennell's request, he asked for a prison interview. And at that interview, he gave police 9 names of 9 more boys that he admitted sexually abusing, on one condition, that he wouldn't face prosecution. And those assurances were given to him by police. And this list of names, the police had in their hand in 2013, when I walked into that police station and disclosed the level of abuse that this man, they knew there was 9 other boys that were not part of that 23, that had nothing to do with that 23. And as such, they could have been contacted. What she then went on to say was that not only could they have been contacted, they then were contacted as part of that last case. Because it was a bigger case, because there was more people involved, it was going to be a bigger scale, because of the media attention,
Yeah.
They then decided to contact these boys, and some of those boys had taken the opportunity to disclose.
Yeah.
I'm very bitter about it.
Yeah.
I'm very angry about it, because had they been approached as they should have been,
yep,
then I genuinely believe that my case wouldn't have been dropped. I wouldn't have gone through the year I went through.
No.
And I believe that, you know, ultimately the police were at fault for that.
Yep. Yep.
I've gone through a series of complaint procedures with police,
right,
who decided very kindly of themselves to investigate themselves. And I've got to the bottom of so much different stuff in writing, but ultimately you get a few words of sorry and stuff, but they contradict themselves. They've changed their opinion on so many things. This didn't happen now, that didn't happen. We've spoken to this person, we've done this. It's just a merry-go-round. The crime commissioner at Cheshire is now trying to get me the real answers.
right.
And that's ongoing to this day. And bear in mind, we're now into 2021.
Yeah. Before we wrap this up, I'd just like to say that thanks for all your honesty and your very candid, you know, account of what's happened, you know, to your life and how it's impacted throughout your life and obviously still to this day. But I'd like to ask you something about the justice system itself. And I'd like to make reference to a particular book that I've read, and it's called Living Amongst the Beasts, and it's written by a chap called Terry Ellis. And Terry recognised that in order to confront his own demons, if you like, his own way of life, his own behaviour, it was going to take something quite drastic. And he accepted a space at Grendon, a place called Grendon, that dealt specifically, or mainly, I should say, it had a wing, that dealt with sex offenders. And I think that's too polite. I call them nonces. I'm sorry. At the end of the day, they're nonces, and that's it. That's the term that would be used in prison. In this case, Terry described them as beasts, and I'd imagine quite a few people would be quite happy to use that terminology as well. But the idea was that they had to live together, they had to share in tasks together, and they had to disclose each other's stories, their offences, which clearly from Terry's point of view could not have been a very nice experience. It was one of those where it's he who cast the first stone. So you couldn't say to somebody else, you know, you're a wrong and you're this, you're that, whatever, because equally people would have said to Terry, well, you must have scared people in what you did over the years. You must have caused distress. You must have caused discomfort. You're as guilty as me, so to speak. And he dealt with that. He had to deal with that as part of his own process. In talking with Terry, and I hope to get Terry on at a later stage to go into this more deeply, I did ask him, did he feel that being in a place like that had any impact at all on these offenders? Was there much chance of them actually changing their offending behaviour? And in his opinion, and he's far more knowledgeable than me, well, I've got my own opinion. My opinion was already, no, they don't change. And his opinion was, no, they don't either. And he's spoken to many, many prison officers and professional people, and they share that opinion as well. So apart from whatever sentence they receive, whether those sentences are substantial enough or not, clearly there's a section of society that believe that they can rehabilitate these people. And I'm intrigued in how you feel about that, David, because I know you talk to a lot of people. I know you campaign with a lot of groups and so on. You've seen both sides of the fence. What's your general view of that?
Yeah, I'm no expert, but at the same time, I have an opinion.
Yeah.
My opinion is that they won't change their impulses, that their desires, if you will. Can they stop themselves from offending? I think that's a possibility. And I think that that's probably been shown in some cases that people haven't reoffended. But the question is, can they stop those urges and that impulse, if you will? And I don't believe they can. And as such, they are always, in my opinion, a risk in the communities. And just recently, I found out some really disturbing stuff. There's a guy not far from where I live who was involved in a junior football club, and he was prosecuted for sexual communication with what he believed to be a 12-year-old boy. And the 12-year-old boy was actually a police officer as part of a police sting operation.
Right.
He was prosecuted but didn't get a prison sentence. Not only did he not get a prison sentence, I also found out that he hadn't been given a civil order. So basically, he could not only walk out of court that day, he could then go, in theory, to a junior football ground, even though he'd got put on the sex offenders list for 5 years. He could then walk and go and watch a junior football game the same day. And what we're talking about here is something that, in my opinion, should be compulsory. If they go to prison or they don't go to prison is for people, at a high level to make a decision on. And obviously, I'm always going to say that's wrong. They should serve a prison sentence, as far as I'm concerned. But to not have a civil order put in place to protect children moving forward, if you do a risk assessment at work, the risk assessment would say if something's a risk, then you have to put things in place to stop that happening. That's the way it works. You've got somebody who's attracted to boys, and then you allow him to just go exactly back to his playground, and back to his areas where those boys will be. Where is the risk assessment in that? From my side of things, civil orders should always be put in place when someone is prosecuted for these crimes, regardless. Even if they serve a 2-year prison sentence and come out after 2 years, they should have a civil order in place to remain them from going to playgrounds, to watch kids in sporting facilities. It's incredible. I mean, some of the stuff that people that have learned about the justice system is just incredible. That while that guy was being investigated, the investigation took over a year. He was actually allowed to go to the junior football pitches and watch the junior games during that period because no restrictions were put in place to stop him. So even though he was being investigated for sexual communications to boys in this country, and bear in mind this is in 2020, he was allowed to continue to go and watch the games of football. It's just wrong. And
I think you'll find as well within the prison service. I was a listener for a while in Swaleside on the Isle of Sheppey, and on one particular occasion I had to cover for another listener. And in case people don't know what a listener is, you're not a counsellor, you're not a trained counsellor, and you can't necessarily give advice, but you can help people along. You can basically get them to open up and make considerations about decisions and so on. And unfortunately, I had to cover for somebody else, and the chap had just come into the prison. And I'm afraid there was an aura about this fella. Just the way he was dressed, the way, his general demeanour. He just came up. I knew there was something wrong instinctively. And during the course of this conversation, the crime he described, I knew that he wouldn't have been in this prison. He just wouldn't have been. And I said to him, "Do you intend taking any courses?" And he said, "Yes, I'm going to take a theology course." And I immediately thought, "You bastard, you're going to add insult to injury, and I be behind God now, are you?" And later that day came looking for me because he knew at that time he made inquiries, and it was known that I used to do tobacco and phone cards, etc., and various other items, not drugs, I hasten to add. And he came looking for me. Well, of course, people came to me and said, "Who's this creep, Frank? You know, who's this bloke?" And I said, "Look, I don't know him. I don't know him. I had to listen to him earlier." And I went along to talk to the prison officers, and I said, "Look, you've got to get him out of here. You just got to get him off this wing, because I will not, I will not be responsible, And one of them said to me, "Frank, if we told you what he'd done to boys and girls, basically you would physically attack him." And I said, "Well, on that basis, you better get him off. You better get him off this wing." And in fairness to them, they did. They took him down the block, and the next day he was taken out. And I remember someone saying to me, "Oh, you done him a favour." I said, "How did you work that out?" They said, "You did him a favour because you stopped him getting seen to, so to speak. You stopped him getting a good idea." I said, No. I said, "I did me and my family the favour, because the person that was going to hurt him would have been me, and I could have possibly got more time, and then that would have impacted on my family. So I wasn't prepared to do it." But the point of why I'm telling you the story is that it is so prevalent now that the prison authorities give these people stories, to say that they were a burglar or whatever, and they are putting them in amongst the prison population. Now, personally, I don't care if the other inmates discover this and they give these people a good seeing to. What I don't want is the people that do it to then get more added to their sentence as a result of what the prison authorities have basically almost invited to happen, because they do know that if people, it's almost incumbent on you, if you like, if you know that somebody is, that you must deal with them, and I think that's an area of the prison service that needs to be looked in quite heavily, because some announce themselves are going to get killed, which quite honestly, I mean, they've got family. Maybe that's not the right term, but if they got, I'm not particularly concerned about. But it would concern me if somebody else was punished as a result of doing that. Anyway, that's just my point. So, David, listen, I sincerely thank you for coming on today. You've taught me a lot, that's for sure. I hope a lot of other people that are watching today. How can I put this? It's going to make them aware of people that live amongst them, that live in their community, their own communities, and and it's not the stereotypical person that you need to watch out for. I was a school keeper for 14 years, and I can remember a time when children on their one parent, children would come and put there'd be small children. They'd put their hand in my hand and would want some comfort. They wasn't used to having a dad. That was a perfectly normal thing to do because I was a father. When things like this became more prevalent or more, should I say, more known in the public eye, you couldn't do that anymore. You couldn't do that. You couldn't be a normal family bloke because of, and I will say it, because these bastards have stigmatized so many other people. You daren't now walk past a playground, and you hear children laughing and enjoying themselves, and you naturally go to turn your head and think, "Oh, that's nice, these kids are enjoying themselves," because you'd be worried, "Hold on, I'm a 60-odd-year-old man there. Is the nanny or the mum going to look at me and think, he's a dirty old man?" And that's my bitterness towards those people, apart from the fact that what they've, clearly done to the likes of yourselves. That's my bitterness towards these people, that they've made life uncomfortable for so many good, normal family people and people within their community. And the same, anybody works in a position of trust now, we look at them suspiciously, don't we? And I know in some cases maybe it's not a bad thing, but equally it does stigmatise a lot of people. So what you've brought up today, and what you've identified today, I hope people will take that on board, and I'm sure many of them will. And what I'd like you to do is that when we finish after this, if you could give us any contact details of organisations, support groups, whatever, either the ones that you work with yourself or others that you know of, we will gladly put that in the information below the podcast. So if there's anything else you want to say, David, I'll leave that to you.
Yes, well, I suppose it's just to make sure people fully understand the scale of it. I mean, we talked, I think you mentioned there about, it's out in the public interest now. Is people are aware of this a little bit more. But for example, the case I was just telling you about in 2020, when it was put out in the media and the guy was convicted, it was in the local paper. And the amount of people that came to me personally, privately, and said, "Oh my God, I never expected this. I can't believe it's this guy. I can't believe," have we really learned? Is what I'm saying is, I never suspected him. And that's the bottom line is, it's normally someone prominent in the community, someone well liked in the community, someone well known. Yeah. And that is the point. And you are quite right in what you said about we're being unjust. I mean, 99.9% of all the football coaches out there in doing all this wonderful voluntary work, teaching kids how to play football, are absolutely, I mean, they are characters that the communities need. That these are the salt of the earth. These are wonderful, hard-working, dedicated dads that have given up their time to run a junior football team. Yeah. But all I'm saying is, just be aware and just make sure that if your kid doesn't want to go to football anymore and starts changing his behaviours, and all of a sudden there's something not quite right. Is think about things. Just open your eyes. Just be aware of stuff. And as regards the internet, I mean, it's a minefield. So all I would say is, if you're giving your kids mobile phones with internet connections, they've got the latest iPhone or whatever it is, you need to be aware, because you speak to anybody now, kids in any chat room are getting approached. Kids on gaming, when they're on gaming sites, they're being approached. There are people that are approaching all the time and looking for inroads and ways of getting to your children. So, it's absolutely massive that people understand the risk and the scale of this, because, it is happening, and this is not non-recent. This is happening on a bigger scale now than it's ever happened. So, just...
Well, David, I'd just like to finish by saying we'd like to certainly, us, the team at Frankly Speaking, we don't like to just end it like that. If there's anything we can do for you in the future, if there's any events coming up, anything you want to highlight, please let us know. And we're quite happy. We have the resources to do that. We can spread the word quite extensively. And,
appreciate it. Thank you.
And we promise you we will do that. So again, thank you very much. I don't like to use the word brave, because I don't want to sound like I'm being patronising you. But my friend, you are a very brave man, and you've proved that, because you took on the establishment in order to get justice for yourself, and in turn get justice for other people. And I think you should wear that as a badge of honour, quite frankly. So, David, I'm glad I got your name right as well, finally. Thanks very much. I'm just going to say a few more words, and then we'll finish up. So, again, people know my philosophy, how I want Frankly Speaking to be. I want it to be real people. I want it to be people that inspire others, and I think today David's certainly done that. Again, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Myson's Building Company, and also the technical advice and assistance that we've had from Raw Media Solutions. So again, thanks very much. Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks.